Hello and welcome. I wanted to make this standalone video because I saw a couple of cool lists that I wanted to share, and as there's going to be a few different topics within this video, I'll say there's going to be timestamps below. The first list we're going to look at is going to be a Sisters and Admech list to show how two armies can play together rather well. Then we'll look at a standalone Admech list that has a very interesting build that has not seen success until now, and then we'll take a look at the Piety and Pain box as well as the new Drukhari Combat Patrol Box, as both those are rather interesting and I would like to look at the value that they provide. The first list we're going to look at is one that's a dual detachment list that placed in 7th place within a 96 player event, so it has done very well and it shows how two different armies can come together to play as one. So let's jump right into the first list. The first list begins with a patrol detachment composed of the Order of the Bloody Rose for Sisters of Battle. This detachment takes up 964 points and it was composed after the latest point change, so all the points are current as of March 2021. To begin with, since this is a patrol detachment, you are required to take at least one HQ choice, though in this case the list has taken two, the first being a Canoness that has an Inferno pistol and the relic Beneficence. This is also the Warlord, however a Warlord trait is not listed here, so I'm a little bit surprised by this, as Righteous Rage or something of that nature is usually very standard on a Becky Canoness, though it does not appear to be listed here, so is that just an oversight or is that something that the player intentionally omitted? Continuing with the HQ choices, the second HQ choice is Celestine, coming with no upgrades, and like the Becky Canoness, the Celestine is an incredibly powerful HQ choice. After that, as it is a patrol detachment, it does require at least one troop choice, but once again the list has chosen to go with two instead of one. The first troop choice is a standard squad of 5 Sisters of Battle with no upgrades, which is actually rather interesting as the list came out after the points change, so they should have really taken a simulacrum because it was free, so it's a bit odd that they don't include a null rod on the Canoness or a simulacrum on the sister squad. Both those options should just be taken automatically as they are free and they give your units a little bit more ability to play on the tabletop. The second troop choice is a little bit more interesting as it's composed of 6 Sisters of Battle and 3 of the sisters are normal sisters, with the 4th being one that's carrying a simulacrum and the 5th being one with a special heavy weapon, being a heavy bolter for 10 points, which is rather decent if you have the points left over to take a special weapon on the sisters. A heavy bolter is never a bad option to take. The last sister is simply a sister superior with no additional upgrades. So once again we see that there is room for special weapons on basic sisters, though generally you're more likely to see them on Celestians or Dominions. Following the troop choice, there are 2 elite choices, both of the elite choices being composed of a squad of 9 Repentia each, making them the maximum size units you can take, as well as filling up the elite choice within a patrol detachment. And there's one dedicated transport being a Sororitas Rhino, which is rather interesting as you would normally think there would be 2, but most likely the player ran out of points, so they can only pick up 1 Rhino and they would have to put the other unit of Repentia into strategic reserves or hide them in terrain until they were ready to attack. Finally, to wrap up the first attachment, the heavy support choice is composed of a unit of 4 Mortifiers, which is a rather powerful unit that can engage very well in melee while also bringing some heavy bolter fire into the mix. All of the Mortifiers are armed with 2 heavy bolters and penitent flails, however what's really interesting is that they did not use points to upgrade one of the Mortifiers into an Anchorite, which isn't the biggest deal as all it does is increase the armor save of 1 Mortifier to 3+ instead of 4+, which does give them a little bit of extra ability to tank some firepower when needed, though it's not very vital to their success in most cases. The second detachment is also a patrol detachment being composed of an Adeptus Mechanicus Mars Forge Roll detachment, and this detachment takes up 1034 points. For this detachment the HQ choice is Belisarius Call, which is rather interesting because at 1000 points Call is a rather big investment. However, there are 2 things to consider, as Belisarius Call can be rather good even at 1000 points, while at the same time you do have 1000 points of the Sisters of Battle to support this 1000 points, so you're not necessarily playing him in an isolated situation, but rather you're able to build a rather successful Call castle while still having a forward position thanks to the Sisters of Battle. Now as normal, the patrol detachment does require 1 troop selection. In this case, the player has taken 3 Cataphren destroyers, all armed with plasma culverins and phosphor blasters. This is probably the first instance of plasma destroyers that we've seen placing so highly, especially after the changes to how overheating works, so it's nice to see that they still have a place and they can function rather well in this list. We'll also see that these play a little bit more of a role once we get to the heavy supports. For elite choices, the list does include 1 Cybernetica Datasmith, which is incredibly surprising because it's rather unexpected to see a unit like this in play, especially at 45 points, though there is some reasoning behind why this unit is included, as the list does include 4 Castellan robots in the heavy support slot, with each of the robots carrying 3 phosphor blasters. Now even with this configuration, I don't think the Cybernetica Datasmith is worth it, as it's very slow to change the protocols, and I'd rather just use a stratagem because in this army list you have plenty of mobility and you can set up those robots rather easily in one position while having your sisters outflank other units. Additionally, you also have the cataphrons, which have that stratagem that works well with the castle and robots, so they have that synergy as well. I'd rather cut the Cybernetica Datasmith and take pretty much anything else, but as you can see, the list was still very successful even with the Cybernetica Datasmith within it. Now that we've inadvertently covered the first heavy support choice, we can look at the second heavy support choice, which is an Archer Dooncrawler armed with a neutron laser and a Cognis Heavy Stubber. These two detachments bring the list up to a total of 1,998 points, meaning that the points are rather optimal in that sense, though once again I would say there are probably a few tweaks that could be made to optimize the list further. A few things that are interesting about this list is how it synergizes, as I originally made the joke in my sisters video that Castellans would be great Sisters of Battle, and one thing I always like to see is the conversions people have done with Sisters of Battle and the Skitarii Ranger heads, as they go very well together on the two models, making a very cool looking Sister of Battle that's also an Adeptus Mechanicus unit. And the synergies between these two armies go further than just the modeling capabilities, but also impact the fact that the Sisters are very aggressive and can form a forward line for the very shooty style of the Adeptus Mechanicus. In this case, this allows the Call Castle to be a very shooting heavy detachment while also having that front line so that you're not sacrificing anything to take that gun line, which could normally be a bit of a detriment within 9th edition. As a whole, most of the units here are very survivable, very tanky, especially when you consider the combination of how powerful mortifiers are with Castellan robots, so it's very easy to see why this list performed so well, and it's one I'd probably play in the future. However, with the new codex coming out soon, it'll be interesting to see how viable this is within the near future as well. Hopefully something like this can still be possible, but at the same time, it'll be interesting to see if some of the weaknesses that the Sisters cover for are resolved within the codex itself for the Adeptus Mechanicus. In either case, I do think the Sisters bring a lot of unique tools that complement the Admech very well, and the Admech in turn bring a lot of interesting tools that complement the Sisters. The second list we're going to look at is purely an Admech list, and it's one that did something rather interesting, though I do think it's a little more meta dependent than the first list. This list came in 4th place in a 36 player event, so it's definitely proven itself within a tournament setting. To begin with, this list is a battalion detachment consisting of the Mars Forge world. However, with that in mind, the first unit in this list is actually not an Admech unit, but an Agents of the Imperium unit known as Lord Inquisitor Hector Rex. We haven't really covered the Inquisitors yet, however, what I can say about them is they're kind of like assassins, and you can take them alongside Imperium armies. In this case, Hector Rex is a rather durable unit that can be rather okay in melee, and comes with a 2+ save, a 4+ invulnerable save, and is a Psyker in addition to that, with the ability to deny psychic powers, as well as cast psychic powers himself. This makes Hector Rex a decently tanky unit that can also prevent psychic powers, something that Admech normally don't have many ways to interact with. Hopefully we see more options within the future codex beyond bringing allies or bringing Graia Forge World units in order to specifically shore it up with one stratagem, though at this time that is not an option, so Hector Rex is a good option for that kind of ability while also bringing some psychic powers of his own and being very durable. Now, as this is a battalion detachment, the player has chosen to max out the HQ choices, taking a Belisarius Call and giving him Mechanicus Locum so that he doesn't have to take up the Warlord slot while still providing his static Psalm code in order to increase the range of his aura buffs. For the second HQ choice, the list includes a Deolosis, a rather common HQ choice that goes alongside Belisarius Call and is great for shooting lists. Finally, the last HQ choice is a Tech Priest Manipulus, coming with a standard loadout. However, he is the Warlord of the list, which gives him a Holy Order Warlord trait, being Divinations of the Magos. In addition to that, he is the carrier of the relic that you get for free. In this case, the player has taken an Autocadiasis of Archenland, which is a rather decent choice when you're just running a shooting list, and expect the Tech Priest Manipulus to hang back and buff units as opposed to accompanying something like Cataphrons into battle. Moving along, we come to the troop choice. In this case, the list begins with 2 units of 3 Cataphron Breachers each, all of the Cataphron Breachers being armed with arc claws and heavy arc rifles. Nothing too unique here, but it does show that they can be slotted in rather easily even into a list that isn't a Cataphron Breacher list specifically. For the third troop choice, this is where things get very interesting because the list has taken a unit of 10 Cataphron Destroyers, all armed with heavy grav cannons and phosphor blasters. In this case, I'm assuming the meta that this player was in was very marine heavy and heavy with other units that have a 3+ save, especially with things like the Death Guard and Space Marines becoming very popular due to having new codexes. It does make sense why you would see something like this because the Cataphron Destroyers with heavy grav cannons are not particularly expensive and provide a ton of firepower while still being rather decent against most other options. However, if you expect to see a lot of 3+ armor saves on the base save, you can do a lot of damage very easily with this kind of unit composition. There's a fourth troop choice, in this case being a unit of 5 Skitarii Vanguard. This is most likely because this is such a low cost unit that fits in very easily and eats up a little bit of points while giving you some ability to move around the table and capture objectives as needed or put them into strategic reserves and bring them out as needed to take objectives or perform actions. This is a very interesting mix of troop choices as you have everything from Breachers to Destroyers to Skitarii in the same list, with each of them having their own function within the game. Now moving to Elite Choice, things continue to be rather interesting, as the first Elite Choice is a unit of 5 Sicarian Ruststalkers being armed with Cord Claws and Transonic Razors. Once again, this is most likely an objective capturing and action performing unit coming out of strategic reserves or using their special stratagem to move around the table very easily and annoy your opponent. Though there are going to be times where even these guys can do some damage within melee because they do have reasonably good weapons and they can actually put out some decent damage in some situations, though most of the time they're a bit too fragile to survive long enough to do so. Following the Sicarian Ruststalkers, we come to a unit of 9 Fulgurite Electropriests. This is nothing too special, but it's nice to see that the Fulgurite Electropriests do make an appearance in a list such as this. With the Fulgurite Electropriests comes a dedicated transport, which is a Scorpius Dune Rider, so that makes a lot of sense, and most likely the reason there are 9 Fulgurite Electropriests isn't anything special, but rather a matter of points, as sometimes you have to cut down points somewhere, though at the same time maybe you can put the Sicarian Ruststalkers and the Skitarii Vanguard within the Scorpius Dune Rider instead of the Electropriests in order to get them into combat, though I doubt that's the case as that seems a little bit too weird. Coming to the fast attack choice, we see 3 units of 3 Cerberus Raiders each, with no upgrades as they don't really have any, and this is rather standard as the Cerberus Raiders are fast moving units that are rather good and help with the Call Castle as they give the list a lot of mobility, which makes up for some of the stationary nature of the Call Castle build. More so, as mentioned before, Raiders are fantastic units that do kinda a little bit of everything and are very low in points. Then to round out the list comes the heavy support choices, offering a significant amount of firepower in the form of an Honored Dragoon Crawler armed with a Cognos Heavy Stubber and an Icarus Array, giving it the ability to put out a lot of firepower as well as residually get some bonuses against things like Harlequins and other armies that include flying units. More so, there are 2 additional heavy support choices, being 2 Scorpius Disintegrators, both armed with Belarus energy cannons, giving you a lot of line of sight ignoring firepower. They'll make a great addition to the Call Castle as it moves along the board and destroys pretty much anything it targets with those Cataphron destroyers. As a whole, this list comes in at a total of 1,997 points, and it shows how creative you can be with list building, as many people discounted units like the Sicarian Ruststalkers, but they do show up from time to time in different army lists as a good objective capture as well as action performer. More so, even though Cataphron Breachers are more popular than Cataphron Destroyers, we do see that Cataphron Destroyers do show up at times, whether it's accompanying Castellan robots or just being standalone units, and both the plasma as well as heavy grav cannon versions are playable, which is rather nice, and it does show the flexibility of the Cataphron units. So always remember to magnetize your units, as you never know when you'll want to play one over the other, because there are a lot of things that may impact how you wish to build your army or what you want to play in a given tournament. Sometimes it might just be because you want to have some fun, sometimes because you believe the meta might be going in a certain direction and you can capitalize on top of that. Anyway, those were 2 fantastic lists, and hopefully with the release of Warzone Caradon as well as the new Admech Codex that is supposedly coming out sometime April, we continue to see this much diversity within the army, as it is in a rather good place all things considered. It would be nice if they improved some of the weaknesses of some of the Forge worlds, as well as giving a little bit more power to units like the Infiltrators, who have fallen off a bit since the 9th edition was released, though it's nice to see even with all these issues, Sicarian Ruststalkers are still seeing play. And for all of those wondering, I do plan to make a new series once the Admech Codex comes out, and I do plan to cover Warzone Caradon as soon as I get my copy in the mail. One other topic I wanted to cover was the Piety and Pain box, which recently came out for $170 if you're in the United States. I wanted to just do a quick breakdown of the value of this box because it was rather interesting to see what was coming out of it. To do this breakdown, I'll break down each faction individually and give you the dollar cost if you bought each kit individually off of the Games Workshop website, and then I'll give you a total combined price of what the actual value would be if you bought all of it individually in one go. To begin with, you get a Lilith, which would cost about $35, seeing as that's what Games Workshop normally charges for a model such as this. In addition to Lilith, you get 10 Witches, which cost $36 on the store currently, and then you get 5 Scourges, which is another $34, and a single Venom, which would be $36. In total, the Drukhari half comes out to $141, giving you a total of 17 different models. On the other hand, when you look at the Sisters units, you'll notice it comes with a Palatine, which is a new unit and most likely will be $30 to $35 on the Games Workshop web store once it's released, as that's generally what they charge for an individual model such as this. After the Palatine, you get the 5 Retributors, which would cost you $55, and an Immolator, which would cost $75. In total, the Sister side of things costs $160 to $165, depending on what the Palatine will cost. On the low end of things, if you bought everything individually, you would be spending $301 to acquire all of these items. What's interesting about this box is that it's definitely a Drukhari starter, as you gain enough units to build a very basic patrol detachment, while on the other hand, the Sisters side of things is more of an expansion kit, because all you gain is a transport support, a heavy support, and an HQ, which doesn't give you enough to build any kind of detachment. However, because of the emulator, you do end up getting a better value as the Sisters player than the Drukhari player, because Drukhari models are so inexpensive in many cases. Though in either case, if you can find one of these and pick one of these up, and you play either of these armies, it's definitely a good pickup because the value is so heavy in this box, as either one of these factions models alone pretty much cover the cost of the entire box. And even though you're getting that emulator within the Sisters box, which is a bit more of a fringe vehicle, it's still definitely a nice model to have, and you never know when it can become a rather good model, especially considering we might be getting a new Sisters Codex sooner than later. Now, one other kit was announced, and the box I'm referring to is the Drukhari Combat Patrol Box, coming in at $140, though if you bought everything individually, it would cost you a total of $230, because the Archon inside the box cost a total of $29, the 10 Warriors inside would be $36, the 5 Incubi would be $55, the single Ravager is $55, and the Raider is $55. This kit gives you an incredible amount of value, because once again, you're saving almost $100 by buying the Combat Patrol instead of buying every model individually. And one other thing to mention is that when you look at the box, it looks absolutely massive and very exciting, and when you compare it to something like the Death Guard Combat Patrol, you quickly realize what the issue is with the Death Guard Combat Patrol, as the Drukhari box not only gives you a way better value than the Death Guard Combat Patrol box, it also feels absolutely massive, even though it contains less than half the models at only 18 models in comparison to something like the 39 models or whatever it is that you get within the Death Guard Combat Patrol box. So it really does show the value of the centerpiece models such as the Raider and the Ravager in this situation, and I think that's something Games Workshop really needs to focus on in the future, because as mentioned, a lot of people are very underwhelmed by the Death Guard Combat Patrol box, and it's sad to see because it is a very cool faction and it has some really cool models, but their Combat Patrol box just doesn't quite translate in the way you wish it would. Anyway, as always, if you've enjoyed the content, please like, subscribe, and share, as it really does help the channel out, and it helps other players as well, as they may discover a channel that will help them build their armies going into the future. And as always, I'd like to say thank you to my patrons. You're awesome people, and regardless if you're a patron, have a great day. See you next time. Bye.